So I wanted to take just a minute to highlight how I would utilize StatCrunch in maybe a couple of the problems that you're going to encounter either on your homework or in this upcoming test. In this particular question, it is related to grouped data, and basically we're kind of looking at binned data. And I have some data in a table that I'm going to create a frequency distribution for, and I need it, the question is asking me to do that with not only a specific lower limit, but a specific class width. And this is what I kind of want to highlight for you in this video. So you can see the answers are already showing up here, but I want to kind of walk you through how I would use StatCrunch. First of all, I've got to get the data from the question, and you can see here that I have all of the data here. Notice that the data is showing up with commas in it. That's going to kind of throw us off in a second. So I'm going to copy the data to the clipboard, and we haven't had to pay attention to this before, but we do now. The delimiter is automatically set to tab, and we want to leave it that way, but we're recognizing it's set to tab. So here the data is already highlighted. Let's use the keyboard Control-C to copy the data, and now we're going to move to StatCrunch, and we're going to paste it in the first column. So when I hit Control-V on my computer keyboard, I have this new window pop up, and what we copied it from said that the delimiter was supposed to be checked to tab. So that's how we're going to adjust the paste window here. We're going to change the delimiter to tab, and it reformats our paste based on what we need. So we're going to click OK, and you'll see that it took the comma out and it pasted it directly into StatCrunch to be able to use the data like we want. Now, moving back to the question in the problem is asking me to construct a frequency distribution having a class limit, a lower class limit of 35,000 and a width of 5,000. There's two ways to be able to do this, but in the interest of time on a test, I would suggest doing it the way I'm fixing to show you. So we know that previous to this question, when we had all the time in the world, we would take the data and we would bin the data for the information in that first variable, having a lower limit of 35,000 and a bin width of 5,000. And what it would do is it would create bins, right? It would count up this information and put it in a separate column here in StatCrunch. That's what it did. Now, if I don't have time for all of that, another alternative for us to be able to do that is to actually just use the graphing function in StatCrunch to figure this out. So I'm going to go to Graph, Histogram, and I'm going to select the variable we're trying to look at, and I'm going to create a frequency histogram with a starting bin width or a starting value of 35,000, and I want a bin width of 5,000. So that's the graph I would normally be creating, but I want to add the value of each of those bars above it. So what's the value of each of the bars? It's going to go above it. When I hit compute, what I've created now is a histogram that is simultaneously showing me the count, the frequency above each one of the bars. So here in my far left bar, I can see that there was one value that fell in the bin that was ranging between 35 up to and not including up to but not including 4,000. In the next bar over here, there were a total of 5 values that are contained in that bar. So what I did is I kind of skirted a step since I was going to need it anyway, and I can look here at the histogram that I created with the values above the bar to fill in my table. So let's see if I can put these side by side just a second. I've got that. So here I have over here my histogram that's really large, and on the left hand side you can see the answers that I was trying to put in or that are going to be used in the problem. And notice that for my table that I'm asked to construct, my frequency distribution table here in my practice problem, I have a value of 1 for the data that fell in between 35,000 up to 39,999, which is what we see here. In the next bar, I have a frequency, right? How many fell within this next bin or class width? I had 5, so here I have a 5. And notice that all of these numbers that are coming from on top of my histogram are in fact the numbers that I would fill into the table. As I've said in class before, don't forget that the histogram is a pictorial representation of the table. So that's a quick way for us to do it. Now I can change this and I can come in here and I can, instead of looking at a frequency, I can look at a relative frequency histogram. I still want the value above the bar, but you'll see here that I have now, for the relative frequency histogram on this lower class limit, I have a 0.04. That's the same value I would be putting into my table. So rather than me having to bin all of the data and create a frequency distribution, right? I could create a frequency table that's going to give me that information as well. I can possibly, kind of avoid using the table in this particular case and skip to reading that information directly off of the histogram. So it's just kind of maybe going to save me a little time so I don't have to rebin it, because in this particular question, as I scroll through, I now have to repeat the parts of the question, only doing it for a class width of 10. And that can be done very quickly by coming in here, changing the class width from 5,000 to 10,000, hit compute, and I now have the values that I would put into the table. So instead of having to rebin it, I can just make the adjustment directly to the histogram instead of creating the table all the way from scratch again. So that's kind of a hint on how I would probably handle a problem like this in the upcoming test.